Hi. So I was going to talk about the consciousness as a continuation of the last one. I think maybe it is my own interest into it, and I fully don't seem to understand it or grasp it, even though I understand the vague description of it. And I think that seems to be the main problem with scientists and theologians. I mean, scientists cannot explain the consciousness very well. They feel it is all in the physical body, but the physical body, the structure, the chemicals, reaction that occurs in brain does not explain exactly the consciousness. I mean, simple thing that what I had said before is the chemical reaction is same when I'm looking at a flower versus when I'm looking at a lion. But my brain tells me that one is a delicate flower, which gives me the pleasure and aroma, while the other one is going to jump and kill me. So how does this exactly happen with the same chemical reaction is not known. So it probably happens somewhere behind the chemical reaction, something which is beyond the physical structure of the brain. And this, I think I talked about it some times ago. But something more to chew on or something more to think about on the consciousness would be, what is exactly the consciousness? And simple definition, maybe what we can think of doing would be something which is not perceived. So anything that I can see or perceive is not consciousness. One might say, how can that be? Well, let's look at it. If I'm looking at my cell phone or a camera where I'm recording, I understand that the camera is being seen and I am the one who is the seer. So the two are different. So camera cannot be consciousness. Let's say now, if I am looking at it, am I looking at it through my eyes? Well, I know my eyes are not seeing because the eyes may be open and I cannot see if I'm thinking of something else. What I see, as I mentioned it to you just a minute ago, is not done by the eyes. Eyes are just the instrument through which the light enters and goes to the brain. Well, so the eyes are different than what actually sees. So eyes are not consciousness. Let's say the same thing holds true for all the five organs of perception. They all are acting as a conduit, transmitter for the sensation, whether it is a music, sound, taste, touch, etc. So I am seeing it. If we say it occurs in the brain, I already know about my brain or my mind. If you say, well, it's the mind, do I know that my mind is happy today, unhappy tomorrow, or yesterday? I'll be better off tomorrow when something good news comes in. So if I can perceive that my mind is disturbed, or if I can perceive that my mind is wavering, or if I can perceive that my mind is unhappy, then mind is not the perceiving, because it is different than what is perceiving the changes in the mind or the state of the mind. So as I just said, and the definition, if something is perceived, the perceiver is different than what is perceived, then what is perceived cannot be consciousness. So if you go beyond the mind, and of course people can talk about intellect, because how do I know if I look at a lion that it is a lion? It is because I have been taught with a picture or live lion in a safari or somewhere in the zoo that lion does this, lion does that, lion looks like this, lion looks like that. And that experience, whether it is from picture or actually seeing a lion or hearing about it through the description, that experience or education leads my intellect to tell my mind that this is a lion. But again, we often say that somebody is more intellectual than somebody else. We sometimes say that as you get older, your intellect drops or your memory reduces. So if something that we can perceive the changes, I know that I can't remember what I could remember 20 years ago. I know several people that were intellectual but are not intellectual anymore. So this change can be perceived. So again, what can be perceived? Intellect can be perceived, is not consciousness. So we went from external, camera or flower or lion, to the eyes, to the brain, to the mind, to the intellect. So all these things can be perceived by something. And when we can perceive something, the deduction that I just gave you by definition, it is not consciousness. So the consciousness is something which is beyond perception, because consciousness is actually perceiving. But we cannot see the change because even though it is perceiving, it does not change. Now, sometimes people confuse the consciousness with the life force or the jiva or a soul. And yes, consciousness has 3 or 4 qualities which I'll mention in a minute. But remember, the consciousness can be tainted or looks like it is tainted by external forces. So for example, if I have a glass which has a water in it, and I put a red film on the glass, or the glass is red, the water will look red, but water is still clear. So something like that can happen to the consciousness when we perceive something as a consciousness, but it looks like it is changed due to changes in the mind or intellect, which are different than the physical body. So again, the confusion occurs because we sometimes confuse mind or intellect to the consciousness. But consciousness is independent of mind, independent of intellect, independent of physical body. A close example could be a light in your room or an electricity. An electricity and an electric light bulb enlightens the room. So if there is a book in the room, you can see the book. If there is a line in the room, you can see the line. But electricity itself, the bulb continues to throw the light even if there is nobody there. So the consciousness is something like that. It gives the power to be seen. It gives the power to the mind to think about lion or flower. It gives the power to the intellect to analyze the situation. But it itself, even though it appears to be mind or intellect, is not. So in that way, the electricity is not perfect example, but it could be considered as close to it. So a light which is shining in the room can be considered as consciousness, which is lightening our physical body, astral body, causal body, mind, intellect, ego, everything. One last brief note on consciousness is that consciousness is not limited by time, identity, and existence. So it said that Desha Kala Vastu is what in Sanskrit they say. So if there is anything which has a limitation by time, something which is there today and changes tomorrow or was not there yesterday, that's not consciousness. If something is limited, when I look at a cup, it is a cup, maybe made out of ceramic, maybe made out of dust, but it is still exists. It cannot, it is limitation, it is not a metal. So that's not there. So we have to remember that these 3 qualifications, and the 4th one that I told you is anything which cannot be perceived, anything rather which can be perceived is not consciousness. Consciousness cannot be perceived. It pervades everything and probably everything happens in it. We'll talk about that later. Thank you for watching. If you like it, please subscribe And if you have a comment, please send it. Thank you. Have a nice day.